Hey, my name is Shanshan. I sell art on shanshan.co and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review 1917. So this is a story by Sam Mendes is directing. Time is 1 hour and 59 minutes. I think that's adequate. They don't really have any fat in this story. It covers this whole journey of two soldiers from one front to the new front. So I don't know where you would cut that. You could cut out certain scenes and speed that along, but I don't think it was necessary. We have actors Dean CharlesChapman as Lance Corporal Blake, George McKay as Lance Corporal Schofield. So these are the two characters. Daniel Mays plays Sergeant Sanders, and Colin Firth plays General Aaron Moore. So the story is two young recruits. They're sitting by a tree. They're in World War I, obviously, in 1917, April 6th to be exact. They're called on a special mission. They don't know what it is. The general gives them this mission. It says, hey, you got to go to the new front. You know, they're at the front, or that front, what they think. And they're like, no, there's a new front, but it's 9 miles away. And he's like, what are you talking about, right? Because the soldiers are the ground soldiers. They don't know anything. They're only on an as-needed basis. So you have this kind of cloud of you don't know what's going on. You're totally reliant on the superiors above you and the central command going up. And the secrecy is, you know, obviously to guard the secrets of war, because there's spies all around trying to get that information. So these two recruits are dispatched to go to the front, and you have kind of this journey of one of the soldiers like, dude, why'd you pull me along? I don't need to go along in this mission. The one guy is kind of the map reader. He's really good. He knows his brother's fighting at the front, so he has the determination to get there. And the other guy's like, dude, we're gonna be slaughtered, right? And so he kind of, first is fighting it, then he kind of goes through acceptance, and then at the end he's kind of carrying the mission forward. So you have this nice character evolution through both of the characters. The really cool thing I thought about the film was, besides the historical accuracy, and they had these monster sets. It was just incredible sets where they're just, because it's mostly handheld cameras, so they're just walking through massive sets, and the editing is superb because you don't really notice the cuts between the two different scenes. There's really long sequences, so there might be, 3-4 minutes of just walking cut. There might have been some other cuts in there, but they're very subtly done, very well done, stitched together, so you really don't notice any of the editing. So that's really superb. And it's interesting because it's mostly handheld. It's mostly either behind the figures or in front of the figures, so you're, from the front or the back. So you really get the feel of living in a trench, what that's like, the hopelessness of the situation, as well as, the sense that the battle can be like frozen and nothing's happening, and you're just sitting on your hands for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden you're fighting a war. Someone gets shot randomly, and then there's nothing happening. So you have this real sense of war, which a lot of war movies I think are missing. They're usually like action-packed, and like Apocalypse Now, there's constant action. You don't really get a sense of downtime at all. But in real warfare, I think there would be this downtime where you get all prepped, you got all the gear on, you're ready to go, you're trained, and then you get there and then you just sit there and wait, and you're like, what the hell is this, right? So that captures the real essence of warfare, which is really cool. Again, the camera angles are pretty unique because they establish that trench warfare. They don't know what's beyond the trench line, so they're always in this trench. If they pop their head out, they might get popped. So there's always that sense of danger, and I think they really established that well through that choice of camera, not having too many establishing shots. And so that really captures the scene really well and kind of drives the paranoia of us versus them feel. And at the same time, you get the viewpoint of how a soldier really would have lived, the lack of information, the communications are cut. There's no cell phones, obviously. They have telephones, but then the telephone wire are cut, so they're just manually handing messages back and forth. I'm surprised they weren't using messenger pigeons, because they would have had those, but with warfare, maybe you can't use messenger, at least loud warfare, like with machine guns and cannons, you may not be able to use messenger pigeons as a backup, but maybe they didn't have them. They were so reliant on the telegraph and the telephone at this point that they didn't think to have them. I don't know. There is a really interesting point about midway through the film, probably in, almost all through Act 2. Well, it is kind of Act 2, right? so Act 1 is around a journey, and then one of the soldiers gets hit. And so that's pretty surprising. In the aspect, you think, like, it's only two characters, so you think, oh, they're going to make it through the journey, and they don't. So you're just like, oh my God, what the hell is this? So that's a real shock, and you really feel a sense of death in a way that you wouldn't normally feel in kind of like a Terminator movie. You shoot up 100 people, you're like, whatever, dude, they're just shooting as many people as possible. But here you have the real sense of brotherhood, the real sense of you care about the characters, and then all of a sudden you're like, bam, one of the characters gone, and it really hits you, and you really get the feel of how a soldier would feel with his buddies being picked off one by one. So I think that's really well done. And it gives a real solidness to the story. So that's, the Act 2 scene. And obviously Act 3 is when he gets close to the front and makes it there. The other thing is where he meets some other random soldiers that are kind of midway between the two fronts. And they kind of give him a ride. It's interesting because they're going to get stuck in the mud. They jump all out and push it. And they're like, oh, let's just give up. And he's like, no, we have to go. We have to get to the front. I have to get there now. I need that to stop this battle, And like the lieutenant of the company is like, yeah, make sure when you get there, there's witnesses because they may turn on you and say like this order never came out and just fight anyway because they're just bloodthirsty. So that's kind of an interesting take on battle in the sense like once you're at war and you become, war hardened, you could be this fierce battle. I think you saw some of the 80s take on Vietnam. I'm trying to think the one with Charlie Sheen. I can't remember off the top of my head, but in that scene, he's like fighting and then these people just become bloodthirsty and they're killing it all without any sense of mission is just to go out and kill. And so he's kind of touching on that topic in a sense like it's more orderly in World War I because there's more central command is still they're in these trench warfare, so there's no way to break down command in a sense. But in the other sense, like once they get isolated, they could just be like, screw it, I don't need that. I'm going to fight. I don't care what you say. So that's kind of an interesting, hair-raising thing. You don't know if they're going to resolve in the end or not. So when they're rescuing this truck, he drives them to push forward, but they also have, get back in the truck and they're talking. And this is right after his friend's death, so he's just like completely shell-shocked. You have all these different accents. They're talking about random war stuff of, meeting girls, whacking off, getting some good food, whatever, just random, battle warfare. So it's kind of, you show like how these guys relate and how they become good type friends. At the same time, you show like how this lieutenant, the guy commanding this small force between the two fronts, he's like, hey, your friend just died. Don't let it affect your mind. Just keep it out of your mind. Shake it off. Kind of like this attitude of World War I. Men are tough. Just shake it off. You can get through it. So this treatment of PTSD is very interesting because they don't really have a handle on battle warfare and the damage it does to the mind like they do in the modern day. My wife works at the VA, so there's kind of this really modern medicine approach to it. And so here we're in the 1900s. It's this early time frame. Men are tough. It's really kind of the height of Freud, and then those guys right close to him. So you have a different feel of how you treat someone psychologically. And so they kind of touch on that a little bit, as well as you have like the end scene where he kind of hands his this guy his own brother's remains, basically his couple of rings and a watch or something. And then he starts to write the letter to the mother, like, hey, is it okay to write to the mother? That was his last request. And so it's like, it's a really great way to end the story where, these two guys start off, one dies, and then at the end he's kind of reaching out to his mother and telling him this terrible news. So it's very interesting on who gets killed, who doesn't get killed. Yeah, and the character evolution of the guy who's reluctant, and then he accepts the mission, and then he has to drive to fill through. He's almost, shot at. He barely makes it to the front. He's like completely wiped out. And then all of a sudden he kind of shakes it off and wakes out of, because he almost drowns in this river. So he's like, walking around like totally out of it. They also have this really nice scene where the soldiers are singing to each other. And there's this soul guy singing in this kind of early 1900s song. Very sorrowful, of course, but very beautiful. And it just kind of really captures the essence of, the hopelessness of the situation, how, they hope they make through, but they're kind of really beaten down. So it really captures that, I think, well with music. It's interesting, too, because there's very little music and a lot of scenes it's really dead and quiet, so you really get that feel of the battle scene. And one of the scenes was interesting because he gets kind of midway and he's in the town, and the town's lit up by fires, like the town's been set on fire probably by the retreating Germans. I don't know if that was part of the real, at least the fires were that huge. They might have set fires, but were they really that big enough to really use as kind of a camera? So from a technical aspect, you're like, oh, they lit fires so that they can light the scene. Hard to say there. I mean, there might have been fires and they kind of exaggerated the fires, so that could have been a possibility. The way they shot this at night, there's very few light sources you can see in here. It's very dimly lit. You can only do this with modern cameras that just have come out in the last 10, 15 years probably. But they did do really shadow stuff in the 20s, 30s, so who's to say, back then they were very creative with low lighting as well. And so it has that really capture of the really nighttime. I think that's really coolly shot. You don't get a lot of the emotion because, obviously it's dark so you can barely make out the face, but you get this feeling of like, hitting in and out of these walls. The Germans are chasing you. You could get shot at any time, be killed. So this really kind of shows the danger of war. And it's really nice contrast to the beginning of the film where they're stuck at the front and the Germans have already retreated, so there's nothing happening at the front. They're just sitting around. And you're like, does this make sense? There should be shooting. You should be able to hear the cannon fire in the background, but they've moved, 9 miles. So 9 miles away is quite enough of a stanza you might not hear the battle that much. They probably would have heard it a little bit, so maybe they deadened it too much. I don't know. But yeah, it's quite a nice feel for the music. Is just very subtly used in this film. The only time they really use music is when this guy's singing right in the Act 3, so it's kind of like, that's kind of like the harrowing moment. They had this mission, but maybe it was just pointless in the beginning. But yeah, it's quite nice. And then you have this quote from the director that these tales were passed down. And you're like, whoa, it really hits you in the end of the film. Like, you know, maybe one of his relatives had told this story. So it's a really nice, quiet look at War One. I don't think, you know, the only film I can think that's similar, well, a lot of the war movies are kind of at the soldier standpoint, so that's not totally unique, I would say, but the trench warfare and the really single person camera shot I felt was kind of unique. Usually you break it up with establishing shot and then you come in closer, and they had only kind of, you know, maybe 10 feet 20 feet back from the actor, and then obviously really tight close-ups here and there, but mostly just that 10-foot range to maybe a 5-6 foot range. So it's really interesting that they're using this really tight camera distances, so you get that real feel of the trench warfare. Overall, I think it's a pretty harrowing film. My brother didn't fall asleep, so it's definitely good. He has like sleep deprivation, so he was totally wired through the video, like, you know, totally tucked in. So it definitely enraptures you and keeps your attention. So I'd rate it really good. I'm not surprised it's award winning at this point. If you want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.